The pediatric wing of Sacred Heart Hospital in San Diego smells like antiseptic and desperation, a combination that Katie Rodriguez knows will never wash out of her scrubs no matter how many times she runs them through the laundry. She arrives at 6:11 a.m. on a Tuesday, 23 minutes before morning rounds, moving through the corridors with the kind of invisible efficiency that comes from having walked much darker hallways. Her slight limp is barely noticeable to anyone who isn't trained to see it. Most people don't notice anything about her at all. That's the way she prefers it. That's the way she's learned to survive. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like insects trapped in glass, a sound that grates against her nervous system in ways she doesn't have time to process. Katie stops at the nurse's station to review the overnight board. Room 312. 7-year-old Emma Castellano. Hair loss progressing. Fatigue worsening. For fluids holding O2 sat at 94%. The chart is 23 pages thick. 23 pages of expensive specialist consultations, each one more baffled than the last. Rheumatology. Hematology. Infectious disease. Oncology. Dermatology. The list reads like a clinic directory, 14 different doctors in the past 6 months, each confident in their authority, each unable to see what everyone else has missed. Katie pulls up a chair in the break room and opens her personal notebook, the one she keeps hidden at the bottom of her locker beneath her old combat boots. She doesn't write much, just observations. Room 312. 6 months of observations. Hair loss pattern, symmetrical, progressing from the crown. Timing, began approximately 4 weeks after General Castellano returned from his latest deployment. Constitutional symptoms, fatigue, weakness, low-grade fever on 3 separate occasions. Exposure history, none documented. That's the problem. No exposure history. No environmental assessment. No one has asked where the general's uniform came from. No one has asked where his boots were stored. No one has asked the question that seems too obvious to ask out loud. She touches the unit patch in her scrub pocket, faded now, nearly invisible, sewn inside her uniform as a reminder of things she's not allowed to remember. Her hands are steady as she flips through Emma's chart again, page by page, searching for the pattern that lives underneath all the others. There. Page 18. A note from Dr. Hargrove, dated 4 weeks ago. Parents report possible exposure to environmental toxins during father's military deployment. Unlikely to be relevant. Proceeding with standard oncology workup. Unlikely. The word sits in her throat like broken glass. Katie closes her notebook at 7:04 a.m. and returns it to her locker. She buttons her white coat, 3 buttons, no military rank insignia, just the hospital ID badge and her name tag that reads Katie Rodriguez, RN. The credentials are real. The background is fabricated. The medical knowledge in her hands comes from 47 battlefield surgeries she performed in Tikrit across 6 consecutive months before the military decided she officially no longer existed. Morning rounds begin at 7:16 a.m. Dr. Hargrove enters room 312 like a man accustomed to occupying space, his white coat starched to the point of cracking, his presence moving through the room like a pressure system. He's flanked by 2 residents and a medical student, the hierarchy visible in their shoulder positions. Katie stands at the foot of Emma's bed, her chart in her hands, her face arranged in careful neutrality. The girl's hair loss is more pronounced than it was yesterday. Visible patches of scalp. Skin underneath looks irritated, almost inflamed. The pattern matters. The timing matters. Neither has changed in anyone's analysis but Katie's. Castellano, Emma, 7 years old, Dr. Hargrove announces to his entourage without looking at Emma directly. Alopecia areata with constitutional symptoms. Rheumatology cleared her. Hematology cleared her. Infectious disease found nothing. We're looking at autoimmune, possibly psychosomatic given the father's recent deployment stress. He turns to the first resident. What's the plan? Dermatology consult, elevated to priority status, the resident answers. And we're scheduling with pediatric psychiatry. the stress from her father's military service may be manifesting as Dr. Hargrove, Katie says quietly. Her voice is gentle, almost apologetic. The deferential nurse voice she's perfected. May I ask about environmental exposure assessment? The room goes very still. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like applause for a question that shouldn't have been asked. Hargrove turns to her slowly. His eyes move across her face in a way that makes clear he's seeing not a medical professional but an obstacle. I'm sorry. His tone suggests he's not sorry about anything. The timeline of symptom onset, Katie continues, keeping her voice steady and low. It correlates with the general's return from deployment. Had we documented what he was exposed to, where his equipment was stored, what toxic agents might be present in? We have documented what matters, Hargrove interrupts. His voice has the edge of a scalpel. What we don't have time for are tangential theories from nursing staff without the medical training to understand differential diagnosis. He turns back to his residents, his dismissal complete and surgical. Proceed with dermatology. Get psychiatry involved. We'll reconvene after those consultations. The entourage moves past Katie without making eye contact. The residents look at the floor. The medical student glances back, not in agreement, but in recognition of a boundary being drawn very clearly. Katie remains at the foot of Emma's bed, watching the general's daughter clutch a stuffed rabbit that's missing one ear. The girl's eyes are too bright with fever. Her small body is angled toward her father's chair, toward the combat jacket draped over the back, the one with the sleeves still creased from storage, the one carrying possibilities no one else has bothered to consider. Katie checks Emma's for line with her hand steady as surgical steel. Her hands have held lives together in conditions far more chaotic than this climate-controlled hospital room. They've stemmed hemorrhage in the dark. They've performed emergency airway management with nothing but a field knife and her military training. They've saved people whose names she was never permitted to know. But those hands, those specific hands, are not allowed to suggest that a 7-year-old girl's father might be carrying the answer to her own deterioration. The girl looks at her with the kind of clarity only children possess. Emma's voice is thin, barely above a whisper. Daddy came home different. Katie pauses. She sets down the fall line with precision. Different how? His skin was itchy. His jacket made him itch. He said it smelled funny. Emma's eyes close. The fever is climbing. Katie can see it in the flush of the child's face, in the way her breathing has become slightly shallow. He washed it, but I can still smell it. I sleep on his jacket sometimes. The observation connects in Katie's mind with the precision of a lock clicking open. Environmental exposure. Chronic, sustained exposure. The deployed equipment as the source. The general's uniform as a vector. 17-year-old medical student James Chen, the one who glanced back, passes her in the corridor 30 minutes later. He hesitates. He asks quietly, was she right? About the deployment gear. Katie doesn't answer him directly. She doesn't break protocol. She simply nods once and keeps walking. But that single nod carries weight. It carries 7 months of invisible accumulation, this being the first time anyone has acknowledged that Katie might see something others miss. It carries the knowledge that confirmation from a source like her is rarer than people understand. It carries the weight of a woman who learned to assess situations with the clarity of someone whose life once depended on seeing what others overlooked, cataloging what others ignored, and acting on information no one else had bothered to collect. By noon, the nursing staff has begun its subtle distancing. The break room empties when Katie enters. The shift supervisor pulls her aside during lunch, not to praise her observations but to warn her. Some of the doctors are concerned about you questioning clinical judgment during rounds, Katie. It's creating a perception of difficulty. The supervisor doesn't meet her eyes. You have a strong foundation here. I'd hate to see that jeopardized by not understanding the hierarchy. Katie nods. She says nothing. Understanding hierarchy is something she learned long before she arrived at Sacred Heart. Understanding when to speak and when to remain silent. Understanding the weight of consequences. Understanding that being right and being allowed to say you're right are two entirely different propositions. Emma Castellano's medical chart grows to 24 pages by end of shift. 24 pages of expensive consultations leading nowhere. 24 pages representing 6 months of a child's deterioration, while the answer, environmental toxin exposure from her father's combat deployment equipment, remains undocumented and unexplored, separated by a silence as absolute as the one that required Katie to erase herself entirely from the records of her own military service. She leaves Sacred Heart at 1914 that evening, her limp slightly more pronounced as she walks to her car, her hands trembling just enough that she grips the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The trembling isn't fear. It's the particular restraint that comes from having learned, through circumstance and necessity, that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one who speaks the least and sees the most. It's the trembling of force held in reserve. And it's a trembling she has learned to hide so completely that no one, not the nurses, not Dr. Hargrove, not even the resident who asked her directly, understands what they're actually standing next to. The morning rounds began like every other Tuesday at Sacred Heart, except Dr. Hargrove had brought his teaching residents with him, 4 of them, all wearing the kind of starched white coats that hadn't seen actual emergency medicine. Katie watched from the medication room doorway as Hargrove stood in the hallway outside Emma Castellano's room, speaking loudly enough for the morning shift to hear every word. 19th specialist referral, he announced, flipping through his tablet with theatrical precision. The parents are desperate. Naturally, they're grasping at explanations that don't exist. He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Sometimes patients present with idiopathic hair loss. Sometimes they're just unlucky. And sometimes, he glanced toward Katie's position, his eyes finding hers across the nurse's station, sometimes well-meaning people without proper medical training project their own theories onto complex cases. The residents laughed. Nervous, deferential laughter. The kind that came from people who hadn't yet learned that real power doesn't announce itself with mockery. Katie didn't flinch. She returned her attention to the medication cart, her hand steady as she counted out pediatric doses of metoclopramide. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of muscle tension that releases the pressure without releasing it into the room. Compartmentalize. The same discipline that had kept her alive in Tikrit with rounds snapping overhead like angry hornets. By mid-morning, during formal rounds, Katie positioned herself at Emma's bedside as the team assembled. General Marcus Castellano sat in the visitor's chair with his uniform pressed sharp enough to cut, his shoulders carrying the weight of command even in civilian clothes. His wife Teresa held Emma's small hand, her eyes tracking everyone in the room with the hypervigilance of a parent watching her daughter disappear one handful of hair at a time. Katie adjusted Emma's full line, her movements precise and unhurried. The girl's skin had taken on the translucent quality that came from weeks of constitutional symptoms, weight loss, fatigue, the kind of systemic decline that didn't match any of the diagnoses Hargrove had ordered. Hair loss that started at the crown and spread like a slow forest fire. General Castellano, Katie said quietly, keeping her voice below the threshold of Hargrove's notice, when you were deployed to Tikrit, what was your unit's exposure protocol for? Excuse me, Hargrove interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. He positioned himself between Katie and the general, his body language claiming territorial dominance. General, I apologize for the interruption. Communitina here seems to believe she has medical expertise beyond her community college nursing degree. The resident shifted uncomfortably. Teresa's hand tightened on Emma's shoulder. Katie took one measured breath through her nose. The antiseptic smell of the room, that sharp chemical tang that lived in every hospital corridor, filled her lungs. She didn't look away from Hargrove. Her eyes remained level, the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst that a room could offer. Sir, she said, her voice dropped to the register she'd trained herself never to use in the hospital, the voice that moved through rooms and made subordinate officers straighten their spines without understanding why. Have we considered environmental factors from the general's deployment history? When I need housekeeping advice, Hargrove snapped, I'll ask you. The laugh that followed came from one of the residents, a young man, maybe PGY2, who clearly hadn't yet learned the difference between wit and cruelty. Hargrove's face reddened slightly, the color rising from his collar like a tide. The fact that Katie hadn't responded, hadn't flinched, hadn't shown the crack he was looking for, that seemed to irritate him more than any comeback could have. That afternoon, Katie found the written reprimand posted on the unit board in red marker. Her name was there beneath the header disciplinary actions, the letters blocky and aggressive. R.N. Rodriguez, questioning physician judgment without medical expertise. Unauthorized medical opinions endanger patient safety and undermine departmental hierarchy. First formal warning. She stood before it for exactly 3 seconds. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical dirge above her head. Around her, the pediatric floor conducted its afternoon business, medications dispensed, vital signs recorded, the rhythmic beeping of monitors that never quite stopped. Katie's eyes scanned the text once more, then she turned and walked back to Emma's room without changing her expression. In the break room at 1500 hours, Katie sat with her untouched sandwich and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Diane Morrison, the veteran nurse who'd worked pediatrics for 17 years, came in with her lunch container and a brief moment of eye contact that said everything. She gathered her things, her movement suddenly urgent. "Sorry, Katie," Diane said quietly, not quite meeting her gaze. Hargrove made it clear who he wanted working his cases. One by one, they left. First Jennifer from nights, then Marcus the nursing assistant, then Susan who usually spent her breaks reading romance novels in the corner chair. Within 10 minutes, Katie sat alone under the buzzing lights, her sandwich untouched on the table in front of her, her coffee growing darker and more bitter with each passing minute. The isolation wasn't violent. It was methodical. It was the kind of professional sabotage that left no marks and generated no complaints, just a nurse sitting alone in a room full of empty chairs. The next morning brought Hargrove's teaching residents back into Emma's room, but this time his presence felt different. Heavier. His eyes had the glint of someone who'd made a decision about you and was now simply executing it. General Castellano stood near the window, his uniform somehow even more pressed than yesterday, as if staying sharp was the only thing left he could control. Teresa sat on the edge of the hospital bed, her fingers woven through Emma's hair, the patches of healthy scalp now outnumbering the remaining strands. Katie entered with Emma's morning labs, her white coat immaculate, her badge clipped at the proper angle. She'd learned long ago how to occupy space without demanding attention, how to be present without being present. Invisibility was its own kind of power. "General Castellano," she began, her voice steady and quiet, "when you were stationed in Tikrit, what was your unit's rotation through the chemical disposal sector?" "R.N. Rodriguez," Hargrove said, not turning around, "perhaps we should speak outside." But the general had already leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with something that looked like recognition. "Why are you asking me that?" Tikrit had industrial contamination from pre-invasion munitions facilities, Katie continued, her voice level as a surgical laser. Hair loss, constitutional symptoms, progressive systemic decline in a child exposed through deployment gear that wasn't properly decontaminated. The symptom cluster doesn't match any of the 19 diagnoses Dr. Hargrove has pursued. Hargrove's entire body went rigid. His residents froze in the kind of silence that happens when someone has just violated an unspoken hierarchy. Teresa's hand came up to her mouth. "General Castellano," Hargrove said, and now his voice had teeth, "I apologize that a nurse with a community college degree thinks she can override my Harvard medical training. Perhaps Communitina should stick to bedpans and let the physicians handle diagnosis." Emma whimpered. Teresa began to cry, the kind of silent crying that comes from months of watching your child disappear. General Castellano's jaw clenched so hard Katie could see the muscle working beneath his skin. One tear escaped Katie's left eye. She felt it before she saw it, that small warm trail down her cheek. Her hand came up automatically and wiped it away without breaking eye contact with Hargrove. Her composure held. Her voice didn't waver. "Sir," she said, each word placed with surgical precision, "I'm simply asking if anyone checked her father's deployment gear for toxic exposure." Hargrove ordered her from the room. His hand came up in a gesture that was meant to be dismissive but landed as something closer to fear. Katie turned and walked out with her lab still in her hands, her white coat swinging at her sides, the sound of Emma's crying following her down the hallway like something she couldn't quite shake loose. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 hours later when Katie reviewed the medication logs and realized that 6 months of Hargrove's testing had generated exactly $247,000 in referral fees to a consulting firm called Peninsula Medical Solutions. The same firm where Hargrove held a 40% ownership stake. The paper trail was there if you knew how to read it: discharge codes that generated specialist referrals, tests that could have been conducted in-house but weren't, a pattern so deliberate it stopped looking like medicine and started looking like arithmetic. Katie photographed 3 pages of billing records with her phone. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing remained steady. But that night, sitting alone in her studio apartment with the walls that never quite felt like home, she felt something shift in her chest, a coldness spreading like spilled mercury, flowing into all the small spaces where she'd learned to keep her fear compartmentalized. Tuesday night at 3:08 a.m., the heart monitor changed everything. The alarm screamed across the pediatric wing like something wounded, and Katie was already moving before her conscious mind caught up to her body. Emma Castellano's small frame convulsed against the bed rails, her 7-year-old body seized in the grip of something that no amount of Harvard-educated diagnosis could stop. The seizure began as a tremor in her hands, then spread like electricity through her limbs, her back arching, her head tilting back, her mouth opening in a silent scream that made the fluorescent light seem to flicker in response. Katie hit the code button with the heel of her hand. Once. Hard. No hesitation. Seizure protocol, she called out, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had issued orders in rooms where hesitation meant body bags. The night shift nurse, Marcus, a good man who'd been told to avoid her, didn't question. He moved to secure the 4-line while Katie positioned herself at Emma's head, her hand steady as surgical steel as she turned the child onto her side. 1 minute 43 seconds into the seizure. She noted it. She noted everything. The slight discoloration of the lips. The pattern of the convulsions. The sound of Emma's teeth grinding together despite the bite guard Katie had already positioned. Dr. Hargrove arrived 12 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt, his hair not quite settled. He took one look at the monitor and stopped. Just stopped. His face had the look of a man watching a chessboard he'd never learned to read, and Katie could see it in his shoulders, the moment his confidence curdled into something else. Emma's heart rate was climbing. 152, 164. 172, the seizure had ended, but her body wasn't recovering the way it should. Her neck veins were distending. Her breathing had that quality that Katie had learned to recognize in Tikrit, the breathing of someone whose heart was filling with something it shouldn't. The muffled heart sounds when Katie placed her stethoscope. The pulses paradoxes she felt when she checked the radial pulse. Blood pressure dropping with each breath in. Cardiac tamponade. Emma's pericardial sac was filling with fluid, and every beat of her heart had less room to work. She was drowning from the inside. She needs pericardiocentesis. Now, Katie said. Not asked. The voice that came out wasn't the voice of the nurse who'd been written up on the bulletin board. This was a different register entirely. Lower. Certain. The voice of someone who had made this call while artillery whistled overhead. Hargrove's eyes flickered to her, then back to the monitor. We need to wait for cardiology. There. 18 minutes away. She won't last 18 minutes. Katie was already moving toward the supply cabinet, her hands pulling what she needed with the economical precision of muscle memory. 18-gauge needle. Syringe. Betadine. Sterile field. She dies waiting, or I fix it now. You are not authorized to. Emma's lips turned blue. Not pale. Blue. The color of hypoxia, of oxygen-starved tissue, of a child running out of time. Teresa Castellano, Emma's mother, made a sound like something breaking. General Castellano, still in his dress uniform from the hospital visit, grabbed Hargrove's coat with both hands. Do something. Please, do something. Hargrove backed toward the wall, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Katie's hand stopped trembling for the first time in 2 years. That trembling had been a constant companion since Tikrit, a low-frequency vibration she'd learned to hide, to control, to work around. But in this moment, standing over a 7-year-old girl whose heart was suffocating in its own sack, the trembling stopped. It stopped because her nervous system recognized what her mind had been trying to deny, that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was trained to do. She prepped the subxiphoid approach with movements that seemed to happen independent of conscious thought. The needle advanced with perfect angulation, passing through skin, through fascia, through the fibrous pericardium with a distinct tactile feedback that said, yes, you're exactly where you need to be. The aspirate came back blood-tinged. 60 milliliters of fluid that had been crushing a small child's heart came out through that needle, and with each milliliter, the monitor told a story of recovery. 155, 148. 141, 136. Emma's color returned from gray to pink. Her breathing deepened. The distended neck veins collapsed back down toward her collarbone. Her small hand moved, and Teresa Castellano caught it, collapsed into relief that made her whole body shake. Hargrove's face had gone the color of old bone. Red came next, a flush that started at his neck and climbed toward his hairline. He stepped into the hallway without a word, and Katie heard him making phone calls before she'd even removed her gloves. 4 calls? She counted them by the pattern of his voice, someone answering on the second ring, then silence while he talked, then the click of him dialing the next number. By the time Katie finished documenting the procedure, 22-gauge needle, 60 cubic centimeters serosanguineous fluid, cardiac function restored, vital signs stable, she could feel the machinery of his network grinding into motion. She could sense it the way she'd learned to sense incoming fire in Tikrit. Not through sight or sound, but through the specific gravity that comes when institutional power moves in your direction. But Emma Castellano was breathing. Emma Castellano's heart was working. Emma's father, a man with the bearing of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions that affected thousands of Marines, was looking at Katie with an expression that suggested he was calculating something. Trying to add up numbers that didn't match what his military mind had been told about what a community college nurse could and couldn't do. Katie pulled off her gloves one finger at a time. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of composure that doesn't announce itself. She'll need continued monitoring for pericardial reaccumulation, Katie said, her voice dropping into the register it had occupied before Tikrit had made her disappear. Chest X-ray to rule out pneumothorax. Repeat echo in 6 hours. Hargrove's voice came from the hallway. Still on the phone? Yes. Right now. No, I don't care what time it is. General Castellano released his daughter's hand and stepped into the corridor where Hargrove was still talking. Katie heard him say something quietly, something that made Hargrove's voice crack on the next word. The room settled into the particular silence that comes after someone has been saved from the brink of ending. Marcus was checking Emma's foresight with the careful attention of someone who understood that the small things mattered. Teresa Castellano had both hands on her daughter's hand, crying quietly, the kind of tears that come from a month of terror finally having an exit wound. Emma's eyes opened. Confused. Exhausted. But awake. Katie checked the monitor one more time. Sinus rhythm. Stable. The kind of read that made everything before it, every insult, every dismissal, every moment of being erased, feel very small indeed. She was logging out of the computer when the nurse manager appeared in the doorway, already holding a clipboard. She didn't look angry. She looked exactly the way someone looks when they're holding orders they didn't write, and they know exactly what happens next. Katie Rodriguez. Her voice was soft. Careful. You need to come with me. Outside, rain had started to fall against the San Diego night. It hammered against the hospital windows like something trying to get in, or maybe like something trying to escape. The rain hammered harder now, sheets of it hammering the windows like a living thing, and inside Sacred Heart Hospital, the machinery of institutional revenge was already in motion. Dr. Hargrove didn't waste time celebrating. Celebration was for amateurs. He was systematic, methodical. By 7:38 a.m., before Katie had even finished her written statement to the nursing supervisor, Hargrove had made 4 phone calls from his office with the door locked. The first call went to Richard Sterling, hospital board chairman, who was just arriving at the country club parking lot. "Richard, we have a serious problem. One of our nurses performed a procedure she's not certified for. Cardiac intervention. On a Marine general's daughter." Hargrove's voice carried the perfect pitch of concern mixed with regret. "I caught it immediately, of course, but the liability exposure." He let that hang. Sterling's golf game could wait. The second call went to James Hayes, board member and orthopedic surgeon with a $2.3 million investment in Hargrove's consulting firm. "James, remember what we discussed about maintaining standards? It's happening now. We need the board aligned before this nurse tries to spin some heroic narrative." Hayes promised to make calls. That was the value of kickback arrangements. The quid pro quo was already understood. By 8:15 a.m., before the day shift had even completed rounds, the hospital's legal department received a formal complaint. By 9:48 a.m., Human Resources opened an investigation file marked urgent. By 10:19 a.m., they had already begun pulling Katie's employment records, cross-referencing them with her nursing license application, searching for inconsistencies. Katie stood in the HR office at 11:24 a.m., facing 3 people she'd never met before. One was an investigator from an outside firm, a woman with a tablet and a permanent expression of bureaucratic skepticism. The others were hospital legal counsel and the director of nursing services, a woman named Patricia who wouldn't meet Katie's eyes. "Your certification shows graduation from San Diego Community College in 2002, the investigator said flatly. "Community College RN program, completed in 2 years. Then your employment history shows work at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center from September 2002 through February 2004. That's 18 months. "Not at liberty," the investigator repeated, writing. "That's an unusual phrasing. Can you be more specific? Was it personal leave? Medical? You didn't work anywhere during that time." "I cannot discuss it." The legal counsel leaned forward, his voice taking on the particular tone of someone reading from a prepared script. "Ms. Rodriguez, your inability or unwillingness to account for a 24-month employment gap, combined with your unauthorized performance of an invasive cardiac procedure." "I performed it to save a patient's life," Katie said quietly. Her voice hadn't changed. It remained level, controlled, the voice of someone who had already made peace with her own destruction. The patient had cardiac tamponade. The attending physician was not responding to the emergency. "I followed protocol." "You followed protocol that requires physician authorization," the legal counsel said. Dr. Hargrove was present in the hospital. He was frozen. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the investigator wrote something on her tablet, and Katie understood that the decision had already been made before she walked into this room. Hargrove had moved faster than she thought. He'd poisoned the board before anyone could hear her side of the story. By 1:13 p.m., Human Resources had contacted the San Diego VA Medical Center, requesting Katie's employment file from her time there. By 2:45 p.m., a response came back marked with a cryptic notation, "Personnel matter, sealed. Contact OPM Records Division if FOIA request is required." The seal existed for reasons no one at Sacred Heart could access. It was a classified operation authorization, a bureaucratic lock placed by the Navy itself. But to the HR team, it looked like Katie was hiding something. Like she'd been fired, or sanctioned, or worse. By 4:20 p.m., outside investigators arrived on site, a firm called Credentialing Solutions, contracted by the hospital's legal team. They didn't smile. They carried laptops and printed documentation from the California Board of Nursing. They had already begun building the case. The security guard who walked Katie out at 6:03 p.m., a Marine Corps veteran named Rivera, someone who'd been stationed at Camp Pendleton 15 years ago, didn't say anything as she surrendered her badge. She'd expected silence from the nursing staff. She'd gotten it. 11 faces in the hallway, some she'd worked shifts with for 4 months, all of them looking at their shoes or their phones or suddenly very interested in the wall. The only person who might have helped was gone, reassigned to another unit at Hargrove's insistence that morning. As she walked toward the exit, the unit patch in her pocket, the one she kept from Tikrit, the medical insignia she'd sewn into her jacket lining years ago before everything was classified, before the government told her she didn't exist anymore, caught on a loose thread and fell to the tile floor. It landed face down. Rivera picked it up, and for a moment, his eyes widened. He knew the insignia. He'd seen it before. But Katie was already moving, already past the point where explanations mattered. She drove home in rain that came down like shrapnel, thinking about General Castellano's daughter, about Emma's small hand gripping hers before security escorted her from pediatrics, about the way the girl's eyes had followed her out of the room. 3 months of building trust. 3 months of watching a child suffer while 20 different doctors ordered tests that meant nothing. One decision to act. 1 moment of muscle memory. And now everything was burning. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning that felt indistinguishable from any other, Katie sat in the waiting room of the San Diego VA hospital at 9:17 a.m. She'd made an appointment under her real name, the one the government said she no longer owned. The intake forms asked questions about her mental health, her support system, her current employment status. She checked none for that last one and handed the clipboard to the receptionist without making eye contact. The waiting room smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner, a smell she'd carried in her hair and clothes for years after leaving field hospitals. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same frequency as lights in trauma bays in Tikrit, in Fallujah, in places she wasn't supposed to remember. Around her sat 37 veterans, give or take, she counted automatically, a habit from triage, ranging from boys who looked barely old enough to shave to men with grey at their temples and the kind of 1,000-yard stare that meant they'd seen things that broke them in ways civilian medicine couldn't fix. One of them recognized something in the way she sat today. A Marine with sergeant's bearing and a prosthetic below the knee. He was looking at her with the kind of confused recognition that meant she'd treated him once, somewhere, under circumstances neither of them could discuss. Katie felt his stare and didn't return it. She opened a magazine from 2019 and waited. Another face caught her attention, a sailor, maybe 40, missing his right arm. She'd pulled him out of a burning Humvee in Sanjin Valley. She'd worked on him for 43 minutes while rounds landed 500 meters away. His name was Martinez. He'd been conscious the entire time, talking to her even as she worked, telling her about his daughter back in El Cajun. He didn't recognize her. The hair was shorter. The face was thinner now. The eyes were different, they'd been confident once, back when she was someone with a title and authority and the weight of a rank that meant people listened. She wondered if saving Emma Castellano had been worth this. Not the suspension, not the investigation, not the 24-month gap in her records that no one could explain without triggering a security lockdown. But this, sitting among the men she'd saved, invisible to them, erased again, exactly as she'd been erased before. The military had told her she officially didn't exist after Tikrit. Hargrove was just making it official in a different way. The receptionist called another name. Not hers. Katie sat in the humming silence and filled out another form, one that asked if she'd had suicidal ideation in the past 2 weeks. She checked no because that required intent, and intent required believing there was a future worth considering. Around her, broken men waited for someone to fix what couldn't be fixed. And Katie Rodriguez, Senior Chief Petty Officer, callsign Guardian Angel, 3 Navy Crosses and a Silver Star, the woman who'd saved Marine General Marcus Castellano's life and was now waiting in a VA hospital waiting room as a patient, wondered if the invisible life she'd built had ever actually existed at all. The rain continued outside, hammering against the waiting room windows like it was trying to get in, or maybe like something was trying to escape. And that's when the doors burst open. General Marcus Castellano sits alone in his study at 2:14 a.m., surrounded by cardboard boxes of deployment records from Tikrit. His hands, the same hands that once held a rifle in the Jolan district now tremble as they rifle through yellowed after-action reports and medical supply manifests. Emma's hair is still falling out. The seizure 3 days ago nearly killed her. 20 different doctors. 20 different failures. And a nurse with a 2-year gap in her employment records who saw something every specialist missed. He pulls out his old combat jacket from the final box. It smells like desert sand and memories he tried to bury. The fabric is worn thin at the elbows from crawling through rubble. As he runs his fingers along the inside lining, something catches, a loose thread where the fabric has begun to separate from the seams. He tugs gently, careful not to tear the ancient material further, and finds it. A unit patch. Faded almost to invisibility. The insignia of Naval Medical Unit 7, Task Force Phoenix. The unit that pulled him out of a collapsed marketplace in 2009. The unit that kept him alive when his left femur was shattered in 3 places. The unit that saved 13 Marines and 5 Iraqi civilians that afternoon, including a 4-year-old girl trapped under concrete. His breath catches. The unit pack's colors are barely distinguishable now, the gold and blue worn to the color of old bruises. But he knows this symbol the way he knows his own heartbeat. He remembers every face in that unit. Every name. Every act of competence under fire. And one face in particular. The senior corpsman who didn't hesitate when the building collapsed. Who moved through chaos with the kind of calm that only comes from having already survived the unsurvivable. Who had eyes like steel and hands steady as surgical lasers. He never learned her name. Never got to thank her properly. The paperwork got classified. Her records got sealed. She disappeared like she was never there at all. The general stands at Emma's bedside at 6:41 a.m., holding his ancient jacket like it's made of crystal. His daughter sleeps with machines monitoring her heart rate, her oxygen saturation, the electrolytes that are still out of balance despite 6 months of treatment. Katie sits in the corner chair, her uniform perfectly pressed despite 48 hours without sleep. She's saying goodbye. The suspension is official now. Hargrove's investigation has frozen her employment. She's here to transfer Emma's care to a different nurse, to ensure there's no break in continuity, because that's who Katie is. Even when the system destroys her, she protects her patients. The general's voice cracks on the first word. Senior Chief Petty Officer. Katie's head lifts. Her hands stop moving. For the first time since Tikrit, someone says her rank out loud in a hospital where she was hired as just another RN. The room seems to compress around those 5 words. That unit patch. General Castellano holds the jacket open, showing the faded insignia. Tikrit. 2009, you were there. Katie stands. Her hands tremble, not from fear, not from crying, but from the force of 2 years of invisibility collapsing in a single moment. The general hands her a folder, and her fingers open it with the precision of someone trained to receive classified briefings. The documents are marked with security clearances she'd forgotten she possessed. Her name. Her rank. And beneath them, the decorations that the military decided never happened. The words on the page blur slightly. 3 Navy crosses. A silver star. 2 purple hearts. All of them dated 2008 to 2011. All of them real. All of them erased from every database and personnel record when the classified operation went sideways and the military ordered her to disappear. The door opens. A Navy SEAL captain enters in dress uniform, his bearing like iron. Behind him, an FBI agent in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. Behind them, the hospital administrator, her face the color of old concrete. The SEAL captain steps toward Emma's bedside, and his voice carries the weight of formal ceremony. Senior Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez. In recognition of your actions during Operation Phoenix Nightfall, Tikrit, Iraq, March 2009, I am here to formally acknowledge your service. He pauses, and each word falls like a bell. Bronze Star. The room is silent. Silver Star. Another pause. Katie's jaw tightened slightly. And 3 Navy Crosses, the second highest military decoration for valor. Hargrove enters through the other door, stopping mid-step when he sees the military presence. His face drains the way blood drains from a wound, sudden and complete. The FBI agent steps forward. "Dr. Hargrove, I'm Special Agent Morrison. We need to discuss your billing practices over the past 4 years." The agent opens the briefcase and removes printed statements. Numbers. Lots of them. $17 million in fraudulent charges. Unnecessary tests billed to premium insurance. Kickback arrangements with Peninsula Medical Solutions. Falsified referrals designed to increase procedure volume rather than improve patient outcomes. Hargrove tries to back toward the door. 2 more agents step into the frame, their presence a closed gate. Marcus Chen wheels in a hospital IT cart, the monitor showing security footage. Not the SEAL captain, the hospital's IT specialist who wears a Marine Corps cap beneath his ID badge. His expression is the expression of someone who's seen too much in too many places to tolerate corruption in the one place that's supposed to heal. At 6:53 a.m. this morning, Dr. Hargrove logged into the hospital records system and attempted to delete patient files related to Emma Castellano's treatment. He also deleted nursing documentation from Senior Chief Rodriguez. He deleted his own orders refusing pericardiocentesis intervention. The footage plays in silent color. Hargrove at a terminal, fingers moving with frantic purpose. Files highlighted. Trash bins emptied. Every frame time-stamped. Every action preserved and reported because that's what soldiers do, they protect the people who can't protect themselves. Every deletion was backed up through our redundant systems, Marcus says quietly. Every keystroke is documented. You didn't just lose Emma Castellano, Doctor. You lost everyone. The administrator steps closer to Hargrove, and her voice cuts like a scalpel. You're suspended effective immediately. Your medical license is under review. Homeland Security's Healthcare Fraud Division will handle the rest. Hargrove looks at Katie. His mouth opens. Nothing comes out. The predator realizes the room is full of apex hunters. 2 years pass like a breath. Katie Rodriguez walks through Sacred Heart's pediatric emergency department at 7:34 a.m. on a Tuesday, a laminated ID badge on her scrubs reading Director, Pediatric Emergency Medicine. The department hums with the precision of a well-conducted orchestra. Residents defer to her judgment. Nurses check with her before calling specialists. The trembling in her hands, the trembling that was never fear, only the effort of restraint, disappeared the day she stopped hiding what she was. On her office wall, behind glass, the 3 Navy Crosses hang in ascending order of prestige. The silver star below them. The photos of her Tikrit unit. And the framed unit patch, no longer faded, now preserved with acid-free mounting. A small girl walks through the ED in a Girl Scout uniform, her hair thick and healthy, falling in brunette waves past her shoulders. Emma Castellano is 9 years old now, and she's distributing boxes of Thin Mints and Caramel Delights to every staff member she can find. She moves with the unself-conscious grace of a child who's already survived the unsurvivable and come out understanding that kindness is its own kind of strength. Katie kneels to Emma's level. It's not a gesture of deference. It's a moment of equality between 2 people who've learned that invisibility is a choice, and visibility is a kind of courage. Thank you for seeing what 20 doctors missed, Emma says, handing her a box of cookies. Thank you for letting me help, Katie answers. The words are simple. The meaning contains oceans. General Marcus Castellano stands in the doorway in dress uniform, medals at his chest, Teresa beside him with her hand on his arm. Behind them, the rain has started outside, drumming against the hospital's ER entrance like it's trying to wash the old world clean. Across town, in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a closed bank, Dr. Hargrove teaches CPR to a class of 14 bored teenagers for $15 an hour. His medical license revoked. His consulting firm dissolved. His country club membership terminated 12 minutes after the arrest warrant was served. He demonstrates chest compressions on a plastic dummy with a faded face, and the fluorescent lights above him buzz the exact same frequency as Sacred Heart's used to. The irony, if he ever bothered to notice, is that he's now teaching life-saving. A man who spent for years inventing ways to profit from suffering is now educating teenagers in emergency medicine, stripped of credentials, stripped of status, stripped of everything except the knowledge that he destroyed himself by underestimating the quiet person in the room. Back at Sacred Heart, a young Marine arrives at the ED with his 3-year-old daughter, her skin showing the same kind of constitutional symptoms Emma once had. Rash. Hair thinning. Fatigue. The ER doctors are cycling through the same failed differential diagnosis that consumed 20 specialists in Emma's case. They're ordering the same unnecessary tests. They're missing the pattern. Katie reviews the chart and sees it immediately. The pattern is a signature now, written in the language of environmental medicine and combat exposure. She orders serum and urinary metal panels. She reviews the Marines' deployment records. She finds the contaminated gear in 3 minutes. The Marine's daughter will recover in weeks, not months. The Marine himself will finally get treated for the chemical exposure he's been carrying since his tour. And when he asks Katie how she knew, she tells him about a girl named Emma and a nurse who understood that sometimes the most critical skill isn't in the protocols, it's in listening to the story the body tells. She touches the unit patch on her office wall. True class, she tells him, is what you do when the lights go out. Emma appears in the hallway with her remaining cookies. She places 3 boxes on the Marine's daughter's bedside table. This nurse never stopped fighting, Emma tells her, even when fighting cost everything. But she kept going anyway. The girl holds a Thin Mint up to her mouth. Emma smiles. Katie watches from the doorway, and for the first time in 4 years, she's not checking the exits or planning how to disappear. She's just present. Just here. Just finally visible. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your history, subscribe for more stories about the quiet people who change everything. Leave a comment telling us, have you ever kept a secret that could have changed everything? And hit like so more people see what happens when the truth finally breaks the surface. Thank you for listening.